It's been a while, but we're finally out of Collab season as we start to see the first reveals for Lyrical Monasterio.
Stand up! Vanguard!
Hey Cardfighters, welcome back to another Cardfight update, and it's been a while. Like the last time that I recorded a video, it's probably been about 2 weeks because the set reviews that I did, they were pre-recorded long ago. And it's finally time to make some new content on the channel. Like, I was a bit not motivated with the reveals of all the collab sets and them not doing all too great with the retentions and not a lot was happening. But with Lyrical Monasterio now on the horizon and an awesome event that happened this weekend now behind me, more on that in future videos as there are some awesome things that happened. But that aside, we got some new reveals for Cardfight Vanguard that we need to talk about and see what this new nation is gonna bring to the table, because we've been playing with 5 nations, but what would happen if we bring a 6th nation into the mix? This is the story of Lyrical Monasterio. But before we're going to talk about the new ride line within the starter deck for Lyrical Monasterio, I need to tell you about the new updated release schedule for some products in the English format, because some products are once again getting a little bit delayed, but now we know in advance so you can prepare accordingly. So the products that are going to get some delays are Revival Selection, which will be released now on September the 10th. Lyrical Monasterio, the trial deck or starter deck, is going to be released on October the 8th, and then the set is going to be released on October the 15th. So basically, if I remember correctly, Revival Selection is going to be delayed by a week, but the 2 Lyrical Monasterio products are going to be delayed by 2 weeks. So depending on your stance, this could be some negative or could be positive. Personally, I'm a little bit optimistic because at least now my wallet has 1 or 2 more weeks to breathe a little bit. So there's the optimism in that. And with that explained, let's take a look at some new cards that have been revealed. But before we're gonna talk about Lyrical Monasterio, I got a couple of new promos that also have been revealed. And we got 2 new V-Era clan cards. And first off, we got a new Tachikaze card in the likes of Discreet 2, Rapid Fire Dragon, Guido Rapid. And Guido Rapid has the ability Auto Rigard Circle. When this unit attacks a Vanguard, put the top card of your deck face down as an equip gauge for this unit. Then, at the end of the battle, cost counter +1, discard a gauge equipped to this unit, draw a card, choose one of your opponent's grade 2 or greater rearguards and retire it. Important thing here is that the act of gauging a card from the top of your deck is mandatory. Now, if we take the skill in its totality, it will read basically as on attack, mill the top card for a cost of a counterblast, and then draw a card and retire one of your opponent's grade 2 or higher cards. Honestly, that's not bad value. You retire something from your opponent, you draw a card for the cost of a counterblast. Yes, you need to mill one card, which can be annoying to some extent, but overall, I think it's actually a pretty decent card. It can be very flexible depending on what type of Tachikaze build you want to play. And it's not restricted to any archetype, so you can just splash it in with any build you want. So I can definitely see this card to be run for certain players. Now, as the second new promo card that we got a Bermuda Triangle one, which once again is going to be a grade 2 in the likes of Chase the Court Manon. And Manon has the ability Auto Rigard Circle once a turn. When its unit attacks, cost counter +1. Choose one of your other rearguards, return it to hand, and this unit gets the original power of that unit that was returned until the end of turn. So it's basically more bouncing effects that could combo a little bit, which is nice, and as an added bonus on top of it, this unit gains power. So there might be some combo potential here. Counterblast might be a bit too heavy because you're not exactly plussing off of it, but depending on how you might call units to the field, this could actually plus you to some extent if you just call the unit from the drop zone or from your deck, or you can call more units to the field now thanks to this card being able to clear a body onto the board. So it depends on your build and how your playstyle actually works, that this card might or might not make the cut. Now, as for the final promo that was revealed today, this time it's a overdress card, as we got a brand new grade 2 for Cater Sanctuary, which is Knight of Trident, Gerald. And Gerald has the ability Auto Rigard Circle. When this unit attacks, if it's boosted, this unit gets power +5 kill until the end of turn. So it's a 15k attacker. Honestly, I like this more than a double R from set 2. If you don't know what I'm talking about, links on top for the set review for Cater Sanctuary, as there's a double R for Cater Sanctuary that can get 5k power in a specific situation. I like this more than that, and that card could be run if you want to get some more grade 2s in your Hexor build. So if that card is somewhat playable, this card is definitely playable. So I can definitely see this being run just by the fact that there aren't a lot of other good grade 2s for Gator Sanctuary. Now, again, if you haven't seen the set review, I definitely recommend you guys to check it out. Also, if you haven't seen any of the other set reviews, definitely check those out as well. I did those in a couple of last days. You might have missed them because usually those set reviews don't get pushed out as much. So if you haven't seen them, I would definitely appreciate if you go check them out and boost them a little bit, because that will definitely help the channel, especially in the current content drought that I'm experiencing right now. But we're gonna fix that very, very soon. Now, that said, now it's actually time to take a look at these new Lyrical Monasterio cards, and these cards are definitely what we would expect of the new Bermuda Triangle Nation. So first off, we got the new heal trigger, which is Estestis Kanami. I think that should be pronounced as Estestis. If not, then put in the comment section down below how it should be pronounced, but I'm gonna go with Estestis, basically a different word of asbestos. So we got the generic heal trigger, nothing really special to talk about here. Then they also got the crit trigger, which is Estestis Misa. Again, not really anything to talk about. They got the reminder text for some reason. I don't know why they initially did that, but it's there. And then of course they also got the starter, which is Estestis Mion. It's just a generic starter. Again, we can skip this because there's not really a lot to talk about. Now, as for the grade 1 of the ride line, now we start to get into interesting stuff, as we got Estestis Nanami. And Nanami has the ability Auto. When this unit is placed on the Vanguard circle, choose a grade 1 or less card from your drop, and you may call to the Vanguard circle as rest. This is actually a really interesting effect, because this basically directly synergizes with the cost for the right deck, where you basically are writing this card. So now discarding a specific grade 1 or less card allow you to negate that minus and get that card onto the board. Now you might think to yourself, what's the point of getting a trigger onto the field, as it can also get a grade 0 onto the board? This has all to do with the grade 2 of this ride line, but also with just the new mechanic from this particular ride line that's all around bouncing your cards back to your hand. So if you're able to discard a trigger, you can get it onto the board, and later down the line you can bounce it back to your hand, so you don't lose out on the shield value that those triggers provide. Or you can just put a grade 0, which is going to be a good booster, onto the field, just prep for next turn. So it's very flexible, which allows you to set up your field, or at least your resources, early on. Now of course, you need a somewhat mulligan for this card effect, because if you open your hand with only grade 2s and grade 3s, you're kind of screwed. Also, orders don't work, so if this deck or this play stuff for some reason is gonna play orders, you need to be careful with that one as well. On top of that, it also got the ability Auto. When this unit is placed on the rearguard circle, this unit gets power plus 2k until the end of turn. It's just a 10k attacker booster that we've seen time and time again. It might see play, it might not. I think it's kind of underwhelming, but depending on how the playstyle works, it's on play, so if you can keep bouncing and calling it, it might have some use. But we have to wait and see. Now, if we go on to the grade 2, we can actually immediately see what I meant with the grade 1, where it's important that you discard the right cards. Because if we take a look at the grade 2, which is Estestis Kiora, we see the ability Auto on Vanguard Circle. When this unit attacks, choose one of your rearguards and you may return it to your hand. So immediately, the card that we called with the grade 1, we can now bounce it back with the grade 2 next turn. I mean, it's perfect synergy. But on top of that, this card also allows us to do something different. It allows us to rush in the early game without getting punished. A good example, if we take a look at Nirvana's playstyle, if you're gonna rush a little bit in the early game with, for example, an Arcs. If you call it on Arcs on turn 2, you get the draw, you attack with it, and then you attack with the Vanguard. Next turn, your opponent can just damage deny you by just ramming into the Arcs. They just minus you -2 because you lose the tricks on the Arcs, and they didn't give you the counterblast that you need for your Nirvana plays. In this case, if we are now Kiora, we can do that same play, but now we can bounce back the front row units and basically tell our opponent to, you cannot damage deny us, but we can rush the hell out of you. So this is a very flexible card, or at least should I say a very flexible skill that opens up for a lot of different plays, which I honestly always like. I like skills that can be used in different aspects, that can either be used defensively or offensively. Now, on top of that, this card also has a secondary effect, which is continuous on rearguard circle. During the battle, this unit is boosted. This unit gets power plus 5k. So it becomes a solid 15k attacker, and if it's boosted, probably an 8k, so that's 23. Pretty good numbers. And if we combine it with the grade 1 we just talked about, it can be 25, which usually isn't any significant, but If you went first, it is because your opponent is still at 10k base. So these numbers can make sense depending on the scenario. Overall, a very good flexible card. I can see this being played in the main deck as well, because the plus 5k can actually matter to some extent, especially with the bouncing aspect, because now we can first attack with the unit on its own, then bounce back those cards, and then call this card in front of it, and now we boost with it, and it gets actually a pretty significant power buff. So even if your opponent gets the defensive trigger, it doesn't matter. And the reason why I say that has to do with the new main grade 3 of the right line, because we've got this grade 3, Estes Kyria, or Kyrie, that's it. And Kyrie's ability is auto Vanguard circle. When this unit attacks, cost Soul Blast 1, choose up to 2 of your rearguards and return them to your hand. So this allows us to bounce back our front row units. So once again, just like the grade 2, we say no to damage deny, or we can bounce back an entire column. And at the same time, we can also bounce back our triggers. So let's say, for example, you cannot really boost your units because you don't have good grade 1s, but you have triggers in your hand. And just by calling those triggers down as boosters, they do give an extra 5k power, thus forcing 5k more shield from your opponent, which can make the difference. But usually you don't want to dedicate them to the field because you lose out on a lot of shield value. With this card, you can just call them down and then immediately bounce them back to your hand, which is great. You get the best of both worlds. But on top of that, it can even go further beyond that thanks to our second effect, which is Auto Vanguard Circle. At the end of the battle, this unit attacked. If your persona row this turn, choose up to 2 cards from your hand and call them to separate row rearguard circles. So this basically allows you to repopulate the board, which is actually really nice. Now this is very similar to what we see in Prisms in the V, but there are 2 major differences. For one, this need to call to separate row rearguard circles. So you cannot fill the entire front row. You are going to fill front row and a back row. Now depending on what type of cards we're going to get, we can potentially still achieve 5 attacks. If there is a card that on attack bounces itself back, or we have a unit that attacks and then can restand, or for some reason can call a new card standing in the front row, then we can bounce back a back row unit for that column, and we bounce back the front row to the other column, and still call 2 units to those columns to have 2 full center columns or 2 side columns filled for 2 more attacks. And on top of that, unlike Prisms, it's inconsistent as we need the persona right, which means you're not guaranteeing the skill all too much. For a good example, look at with Hex Orb. Hex Orb is not consistent enough to warrant its playstyle, as it's all behind the persona right ability. In this case, for Kyrie's abilities, it's not that bad that this particular aspect is behind the persona right, because her first ability is actually pretty solid because it opens up different playstyles, and depending on the support cards, it could actually matter a lot even without the potential multi-attacks. And this is once again a good example why the grade 2 of the right line is actually a really good rearguard, because now we can keep swinging for high columns because we can have the grade 2, swing with it, probably 23k column, bounce back the column and call the column again and have once again a 23k column ready for another attack wave. So overall, pretty solid, and I'm very excited to see what type of support cards we're going to see around this to abuse this bounce mechanic even further than just the generic playstyles with creating better columns or just abusing triggers or PGs from your hand. Now on top of that, there was one more card revealed earlier today, which is another card from the trial deck, which is this grade 1 Chewing Girl Shia. And Shia has the ability, although when this unit is placed on a rearguard circle, cost Soul Blast 1, look at the top card of your deck, call to an open rearguard circle and put it into your hand. If you put a card into your hand, choose a card from your hand and discard it. So this, interestingly enough, is a double-sided card. Either it allows you to get 1 card to the field for Soul Blast, or it's a cycle card for Soul Blast. Now, you might think to yourself, why would you play this card? Because look at the base power. It's 3k. 3k is really bad. And then if we, for example, abuse that with the grade 3 of the right line, which allows to bounce back an entire column and then call a new column, you might think to yourself, why would you call this column? Because this card with another grade 2 doesn't really make for good numbers. But then I want to remind you, this card can potentially set up for 5 attacks. Because if there is a way to bounce back another unit in the front row to the other column and leave an empty rearguard circle open, now if we bounce back a column and we call this grade 1 as one of the units in the column, now this grade 1 can then call a new unit to the other side and have 5 attacks. And yes, the 3k might sound underwhelming, but if we have the grade 2 of the right line, just by the fact that this card can boost that grade 2 gets another 5k, and because of the 5k, it still becomes an okay 18k column, so it's still hit for a decent number, and with potential extra triggers or other power skills, it can still hit for decent numbers. And I think the sacrifice of the potential 5k for an extra attack will probably be worth more than just the 5k on this particular column. So overall, I think it's a really flexible and solid card that opens up for more multi-tech options or just for more cycle. Because keep in mind, you aren't forced to call the card to the Rayguard circle. If it's a really good card that you want in your hand, maybe it's a trigger and you don't want to call to the field, you can just add it to your hand and discard a card that isn't good. Or maybe it's a Persona right target or something else and you cannot immediately bounce it back to your hand, so you don't want to make it vulnerable for your opponent. You once again can put it into your hand. The fact that this card gives you that flexibility for just achieving the multi-attacks or just adding those cards to your hand is actually really good. And the fact that this is a support card in the starter deck for this particular playstyle is kind of ridiculous. I think this is really interesting. So I cannot wait to see the rest of the support for this starter deck, or at the very least what the main set of Lyrical Monasterio is going to provide for the nation. Because if this is just a start, I think Lyrical Monasterio is going to be looking very spicy, and I'm not even referring to the artworks. I'm just talking about the skills here right now. Now, speaking about Lyrical Monasterio, there's even more news on the horizon. So, while editing, I realized I forgot to talk about the brand new starter deck that Bushiroad announced, because Bushiroad announced starter deck 6, which is going to be a brand new Dragon Empire starter deck. This is kind of surprising that we're gonna get another Dragon Empire starter deck, and that means it will also introduce a brand new Dragon Empire right line. This will be the 4th right line for the nation being introduced in Overdress, and this particular starter deck will have a boss unit that's being named Blaze Seal Maiden Bafsagara. Now, besides that, we don't know anything about any specifications about what the units will do, how the skill works. It's all pure speculation from this particular point onwards. Now, the only thing that we do know is that this starter deck will contain a couple of reprints. I believe the Perfect Guard as well as the triggers are going to be reprinted from the original starter deck. So that basically means that Dragon Empire won't get access to multiple crits or fronts unlike the other nations. Would be a bit unfair if it was so that makes sense. And on top of that, I believe the starter deck will also contain a couple of more triple R cards than the usual starter deck. I believe 3 or 4 triple Rs will be contained in one starter deck. Now, I expect that we're gonna see more information about the skill reveal somewhere down the line between set 3 or set 4, because this starter deck is released between those two major sets. So it will take a while before we learn more about these cards, but at the very least we now know that the Blaze Maidens might become an actual legitimate archetype or a playstyle. Or maybe this will be a spin-off on the Blaze Maidens, because this particular unit, this new grade 3 boss unit, is called Blaze Seal Maiden. So put your tinfoil hat on and come up with those conspiracy theories, whatever this unit might do, as it will take a while before we actually gonna learn what she will do. Now, with this rectify, I will give it away to pass me to wrap up the video itself. Because next week, we're going to get information. I think we're going to see the right line, but at least we're going to get information for the angel-like unit for Lyrical Monasterio. This is the half angel, half demon-esque thing with the black and white pattern on her wings. And we know that her right line or her playstyle has to do with cards in the bind set. It's probably going to be Mystery Flare Gear Chronicle, the girl version. So I'm probably gonna be excited for it, so I'm very curious of how that's gonna be panning out, and if it's somewhat similar to Mystery Flare, and seeing as how Overdress, the playstyles, and the skills actually make sense and they actually work, I cannot wait to be able to play with the Mystery Flare deck that doesn't suck out of the gate. So yeah, that already makes me exciting. Then on top of that, we're also gonna see more Shaman King information next week. Now, don't click away. Yes, I know it's more collabs, but keep in mind, this is probably just initial information, and Shaman King isn't due for the end of this year, so it will probably take a few months before they actually start revealing more cards for that, and we're gonna go into a low mode once again. But we're gonna prepare for that, and I have things prepared if we ever are going to see another content drought. I'm not gonna let that happen again. And then beyond that, we also saw some information for the stream in about 2 weeks. Because in about 2 weeks, there's apparently a special stream planned They haven't really told us what the content of the stream is going to be, but Kidani, aka the godfather of Vanguard, our big boss honcho of the company, is going to be present there, as well as Dr. O. So there's probably something big going on here that probably makes that live stream special for a specific instance. So we have to wait to see what the next few weeks are going to bring, because apparently some big things are planned. I know some people are speculating a premium band list, but I don't know why Kidani would have to show up for that, because that doesn't really make sense, but who knows? I could be wrong here. We have just to wait and see what in the next few weeks are going to bring to us. But with it said, let me know in the comments down below what you guys think of these new cards for Lyrical Monasterio. Are you hyped that we're finally going to see actual new cards that we English players can get a taste or a grip on? Because yes, I know collab sets usually are a bit underwhelming. Either the cards are underwhelming or we're just not interested because the likelihood of us getting those cards is very low. Now that said, they have confirmed that Token Rumble will be released for us in January, but will it actually matter? I'm not so sure. I know there are some people that are actually fan of the nation, or at least from Token Rumble itself, so I know they are going to play it, but I don't really think the cards will matter, at least for a competitive level, as probably at the time that those cards will come out, I think overdressed the 5-6 nations are probably too far ahead to actually make those cards, at least give them a fighting chance. But we have to wait and see. I could be completely wrong here. That said, let me know in the comments down below what you guys think of these new cards for Lyrical Monasterio and how hyped you are for the new reveals on the horizon. As always, I'm going to give a huge shout out to my Patreon supporters over at patreon.com/VanguardInsider for making this possible. If you do want to support the channel or everything that's happening on the channel, you can simply go to patreon.com/VanguardInsider and become a Patreon today. But with that said, I've been Mr. Time Leap, and I'll see you guys in the next one!